When I came to this, to do her story, I had no idea. I knew 5 women already. I knew Helen Keller, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Florence Nightingale. Although I've been to seminary, it was at a Lutheran seminary, I did not know much about this woman. And I am in awe of how much more women did in their lives. When I think of my life and my little troubles, and I think of Katie Luther, it is mind-boggling what a woman's life is like. So, here we go. My name is Cathryn von Mora. Most of you know me as Martin Luther's wife, but even before there were women's rights, I think that my life stands out, not merely as Luther's rib, but as a strong woman in my own right. I will let you decide. I was born on January 29th, near Purgau, Germany, and the year was 1499. The von in my name once meant that I was a family of nobility and a knightly bloodline. But my papa's fortune disappeared, like so many others in the late 1400s and early 1500s. Still, it had our land. Land was one of the few things people could count on. Owning land meant social status. And hard work on the land caused us to eke out a living. Strong sons were special because when fathers died, sons inherited the father's land. In my day, teenage girls got married. But love, as you think of it today, I'm told, meant very little to us. Parents would choose likely husbands for their daughters, and then they would pay the husband's family a dowry. The bigger the dowry, the better the family that she would marry into. Therefore, the bigger the dowry, the easier life was for the wife. My father's name was Hans, and he had little hope of ever providing a dowry for me because my mother had died and my father had remarried by the time I was 6. So I embarked on the second life plan for girls. I was sent to a convent to receive an education when I was just 6. My father was to place my life in the hands of God. I remember well the day that my father took me to the convent. We rode on the cart behind the 2 big workhorses, and we bounced along the fertile meadows. We came to a huge city, larger than any I had ever thought of seeing in my life. We arrived at the Benedictine monastery, and the butterflies in my stomach were all aflutter. The conversation my papa had with the nuns was very short, and he paid the fee that made it possible for me to stay. As he left, everything that was familiar and comforting to me changed. But I had little time to think about my loneliness. I kept busy studying, singing songs, and working to feed myself and the other students and nuns that cared for all of our welfare. We prayed 7 times a day, every day of the week. We cared for the sick and injured people from the town and for the livestock on the convent farm. I liked the piglets the best, and watching the newborn calf stand on her feet for the first time, it made us all giggle. And life became predictable, and I was happy again. Life at the convent was very ordered. We rose at 1 a.m., put on our white habits. We went to worship service, which lasted about an hour, and then, by the way, it was in Latin, which I could not understand. Then we would go back to bed until 6 a.m. and get up. There were 5 more services that punctuated our day. We considered prayer to be our work. Rules were very strict. We competed with each other to see who could serve God by having the hardest life. In the 1500s, all orders of the church concentrated on one main thing, and that was adding up all of our good deeds. We saw God as an angry judge, and our good deeds hopefully helped us escape punishment and hell. We performed good works to shorten our time in purgatory. We fasted, prayed, took vows of silence, gave away all of our possessions. We lived in poverty. We refused to marry. We obeyed the person in charge of the order. And all this was done to please God and to make up for our sins. In fact, some nuns and monks were so worried about their sins that they would beat themselves bloody to punish themselves for their sins. Well, when I was 10 years old, my education was considered finished. But again, my parents had to look to money. I had not seen them but once during those 4 years. And my father knew it was cheaper to send me to another convent. And so when I was 10 years old, I was uprooted from the Benedictine monastery and put in with the Cistercian sisters, who were a silent order. So at the age of 10, my life changed even again. This convent I was at, besides being silent, was also austere. There were no stained glass and no art in our cells, but perhaps a simple cross or a picture of Mary. Breakfast was bread and water. Lunch were some vegetables we had grown, and supper was a thick soup. And on Friday, our treat was to have herring. I took my vows in 1515. At the age of 16, I became married to Christ. Now, just a few years later, in 1517, Martin Luther had begun teaching at Wittenberg, and he then went and posted 95 theses to the castle door at Wittenberg. This treatise called into question many teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. Dr. Luther was questioning the Roman Church's authority. Dr. Luther challenged the Church, calling the Church to get to the heart of the biblical witness, and that grace was a free gift. Grace and forgiveness were not to be bought, as indulgences were essentially paying for forgiveness of sins. Luther was angry at the Church for its manipulation of vulnerable people in the Roman Catholic Church's selfish endeavors as building up the church in Rome, St. Peter's. Also, the complaints that Luther made called for the church to discuss stances around the Pope's infallibility, which people were aghast, and also about the celibacy of priests and nuns. This document that he nailed to the door in Wittenberg absolutely was a shockwave through the church. If I were to put one word to the Wittenberg door, what is the one word that characterized it? It would be the word justification. We are justified by grace through faith, not anything the church could do or sell. Now, what's interesting is that during this time was when the printing press had just been invented, and so this document became circulated much wider than anything in the past. We heard about this in the silent monastery because someone snuck it in. We're not sure who it was, but we found this document and read it and discussed it, whispering in silence to each other. It was groundbreaking. Luther had become excommunicated. Just writing those 95 things, he was excommunicated and he was going to be put to death, but someone kidnapped him and he was writing somewhere else. But what he'd done was seen as being treasonous. We knew that even reading his writings was looked upon, and we could have been hanged for just reading his writings. Here's one thing he said about celibacy. We spoke in different ways than you speak today. Therefore, priests, monks, and nuns are duty-bound to forsake their vows whenever they find God's ordinance to produce seed and multiply as powerful and strong in them. In other words, Martin Luther was challenging celibacy for the first time. So, 12 of us were particularly enraptured with this and found it exciting and dynamic, and we believed many of these things. So we wrote a letter to the highly learned Dr. Martinus Luther at Wittenberg. We wrote him since we thought that perhaps the things he was saying, he would be interested in helping us get out of the convent. So we wrote and we whispered about it to each other. We thought that he might be sympathetic. Later we heard that Dr. Martin Luther had prayed and considered our request to flee the convent. And he enlisted the help of the herring man, the man that sold us herring on Friday nights. His name was Leonard Cope, and so they put together a plan. We knew that if we were caught escaping, we could be hanged. So we were very careful of how we spoke about our plan. We decided the night to escape would be the night before Easter, because people would be so excited about the celebration next day, they would be absolutely asleep, they would not hear a thing. So, on the night of our escape, a very scary thing happened. My aunt was the abbess of the convent, and we had especially kept our conversations from her a secret. She came to me on that very night we were going to leave, and she said that she wanted to speak to me. Oh, I thought our plan would be foiled on that very night. She told me that she had heard of our conversation and that she knew what we were going to do. She said the walls are too thin. Well, she said, wait for me, I want to get something. Well, I had no idea she was going to get something to punish me. She was going to chain me up. I was absolutely scared to death. I just stood there paralyzed in fear. She returned with a shawl, and she said, this shawl belonged to your mother. Remember, she died when I was just 6. It was knitted by your grandmother. She said, my sister wrapped you in it when you were born. And then she said, the weather is cold, Kate. Wrap this shawl around you. And when you get to Wittenberg, you can wear it until your lovely red hair grows out. And then she kissed me on both cheeks. She was giving me her blessing. So we all went to bed. And at 9 o'clock, on the night before Easter, we climbed out of our windows of the convent where they were all sleeping, and we got into the cart that he had. It was the cart that he would bring herring into the convent. And so, can you imagine how it smelled? So, ever so quietly, sneaking through the moonlight, we crawled into the most disgusting smelling place I could imagine. Now, people might have told you that in fact, I have to tell you, your pastor thought it was a pickle barrel. And I told him no. It was a herring barrel, which was much worse. But we were small women. I still couldn't fit into a barrel. So we just crouched down beside the barrels. A tarp was put over us, and that was our escape vehicle. So we got into it, and we were on our way.